Hi team, this is your lecture for week 2. Today we're going to talk about 3 things, and I'm pretty much going to cover the big ideas in each of the chapters you are meant to read for today. That means first I'm going to talk about how to choose a speech topic, then how to research it, and finally how to organize the ideas inside the topic. So first, a number of you have already flagged in the discussion sections that it's hard to choose a speech topic for a number of reasons. First, you need to choose something that is broad enough for the entire quarter, yet specific enough that you can cover it in a single speech. You also need to choose something that you're interested in, but that the audience is interested in as well. Now, the best way to resolve these contradictions, I think, is to divide the idea of your speech topic in two in your head. There is the main idea that you're exploring, and then there's the objects with which you explore that idea. Let's use the nerdwriter as an example. Now, last week you saw a video on Arrival, and this week you saw a video on The Prisoner of Azkaban. And both videos, I would argue, have the same main idea, that there is a relationship between the medium and the message that, when used properly, can make the best film. Now, the videos cover these ideas but are done in very different ways. The videos on Arrival is presented as a response to other worse movies. And the video on Azkaban is presented as a means by which an entire generation of adults generated media literacy, learned what is inside a good movie. Now, there's many ways in which a nerdwriter could explore the same topic, and there's many ways in which we can debate his definition of a good movie or a worse movie. But what's interesting here is that he chooses 2 different movies which appeal to 2 very different audiences in order to explore the same idea. In order to talk about how the marriage between medium and message is important to produce a film, he talks about Harry Potter, a movie aimed at people who have read the books, aimed at a generation of young adults, and then he chooses Arrival to express the same idea, but this time aimed at the average moviegoer, the blockbuster moviegoer. In a similar way, I want you to think about a main idea and different objects with which you can address that idea. The larger idea should be a relationship, a structural problem, a philosophic question that you might have, a larger global problem, something that's broad and hard to entirely cover without a good example to showcase it. Your objects then are the examples that you might choose to entice the interest of your audience. Choose a main idea that you're interested in, and then an object that you think the audience might be interested in. For example, you might choose a main idea like climate change, or how do we fix a problem that's big like climate change. And then in your first speech, you might give us an informative speech on vegetarian meat alternatives. Right? You're choosing a larger, broader idea that's hard to cover entirely in one speech, and then you're choosing an object that is easier to cover in one speech, and that is a good example of your problem. If you have questions about your speech topic, if you're not sure what to choose, you can do 2 things. You can either email me and I can help you develop that topic, or what I would suggest is post your tentative idea in the discussion post. Read through those, see what your audience, what your teammates, what your classmates are talking about, are interested in, and you can use that to discuss in the discussion section your topics. What is interesting to people, what isn't interesting to people, who thinks this is a good idea, who doesn't. Remember, choose your speech topics by Sunday midnight and let me know what they are in the discussion section. You can find it on Moodle. Okay, now I want to talk about research. One of you posted in the questions, in the discussion section, how does one improve their ethos, or how does one showcase that they are knowledgeable in a topic when it's an impromptu speech? And that really hits the core of what I want to talk to you about in the research section. Now, ethos is a Greek word that's pretty much used as credibility. Now, a speaker can persuade an audience through ethos, pathos, or logos, credibility, emotion, or logic. We'll get to the other two later in the quarter, but today let's talk about ethos a little bit. How does one build their credibility to an audience? You're either someone the audience already knows as a credible person, or you have to demonstrate this credibility in the speech. And to do so, you have to signal to the sources of your knowledge. In an impromptu speech, you might just tell your audience that you're an expert in this because you've taken a class in it, because it is something you like, something that doesn't require a lot of work. But in your informative speeches, in your main speeches throughout the quarter, you're going to have to do a little bit more than that. And that's when research comes in. You need to tell the audience things that go beyond their current knowledge or that are insightful commentaries on the knowledge that they already have. You can't just tell them these things, you need to tell them why it is that you know these things. This is all a long preamble to say that you gotta research. Now, to give you a more specific guideline, I want each of your speeches to have at least 3 sources in them. Not all of them have to be academic. I want at least one source to be an academic source that you find by researching journals through the Northwestern Library. The other 2 can be a little more loose. They can be things that make sense based on your topic. So if you're talking about movies, then might be movie reviews or movie critics might be a great source for you. If you're talking about food, then interviews with chefs or YouTube videos might be a great source for you. One academic source and then 2 sources that are relevant to your topic. And you have to signal towards those in your speech. So when you're talking to your audience, you might say something like, according to Communications and Critical Cultural Studies journal, this, and that. Or you might say, according to a New York Times article, and that. You have to verbally signal the source of your knowledge to an audience. If you have specific questions about how to research, if you have specific questions about how to find an academic journal that's talking about something you're interested in, one of your speech topics, make sure to email me or put it in a discussion post. Ask your classmates where they think they might be able to find sources on your topic. Okay, now I want to talk about outlines and about organization. Now, chapter 7 is a little bit broad because it first talks about organizing logics for your speech, and then it talks about outlines. And I want to make sure I cover both of those. Now, the book gives you a number of examples on how to organize your speech, and it names them. Things like topical, spatial, chronological, rambling. Now, these are just names for relationships within the speech. These are the relationships that your ideas have with one another. And it sounds pretty obvious that they ought to be organized in some way or another, but you'd be surprised at how many speeches are completely disorganized. What happens when you don't organize your topics, your ideas, in a way that makes sense is that audience members are left with the task to figure out why it is you're talking about the things you're talking about. Like I mentioned last class, public speaking is already an uphill battle. You don't want to give your audience more reasons to be distracted. In fact, the opposite. You want to minimize the work that they have to do to understand what you're talking about. And so by organizing things in the way that makes the most sense, you allow them to follow the speech without any effort. And importantly too, you allow yourself to follow the speech without effort. By organizing the speech properly, it's easier for you to remember what comes next. And therefore, you don't have to spend that energy thinking about the speech. Instead, you can spend it performing the speech. So, depending on the speech topic that you choose, there are many ways in which you can actually organize the speech, many ways beyond the ones that the book gives you. What I want you to remember is that this needs to make logical sense. You might go from something that's small to something that's big. You might jump between examples across international cities. As long as you signal that, as long as it makes sense, you should be okay. Now, I don't want to talk too much about what we're going to do in the introduction of our speeches because we're going to cover that next week. But something that you will be doing is explicitly telling your audience how your speech is organized. You're going to give them a preview of your main points. And for that, you're going to see something along the lines of Hi, today I'm talking about blank. And to do so, I want to talk to you about three things. Three, you will notice, is the magic number. This, and that. Now, I like dividing speech topics or speeches in three because it's an easy number to remember. It gives you enough breadth to divide the speech in chunks that make sense, but also gives the speech the texture, the traction necessary, so people don't get bored with one thing, or people don't think you're talking about one thing for too long. By pacing your speech in three different sections, make it easier for the audience to pay attention, to follow the speech, easier for you to remember what's happening and remember what comes next. Now, this is why I love the I Have a Dream speech as an example. Its organizing logic is past, present, future. And the language in the speech reflects that organizing logic so that the speaker doesn't really have to tell you what's happening. It's pretty easy to get. Now, he gets away with that because the rhetorical situation, the reason he's talking, the people he's talking to are a specific one. You are still going to have to signal and make that organizational logic explicit in your speech. And we're going to start doing it with your impromptu speech this week. In your speech tomorrow, I want you to present to the class an item that is important to you. It can be anything, a toy, a paper, a blanket, a song, as long as you can show it to the class on video. You're going to tell us three things about it and use an organizing logic to make it clear why you're talking about those three things. As simple as that. No less than 2 minutes, no more than 2 minutes and a half. That's pretty much it for today. I'm going to spend the rest of the week answering to the questions that you might have in the discussion sections. Feel free to email me if you have any other thing you want resolved. And see you next week. I'm excited to hear your speeches.